So I'll just introduce you just a minute.
Okay, please.
So good evening. I'm Shalini Prakash, and on behalf of all the faculties of design of Studio 8, I welcome you to the first of the semester's lecture series. I would like to thank all the students who have joined us as audience, and we do hope that you stay interested and attend the rest of the lectures as well. This lecture is part of the Architecture Design Studio, where we intend to recognize and explore the position of architecture in an urban design context. It is about history, associations, and narratives embedded in the urbanity of Bangalore. And the lecture is titled Slow City. This session will commence with a with a discourse by architect Dinesh Rao, post which the students could discuss their studio work with him. Architect Dinesh Rao is a practicing architect and part-time academic based in Bangalore. He has studied at the School of Architecture, now part of the Faculty of Architecture at CEPT, and ET at Zurich. Along with Deepa Mandrekar, he has designed architecture, interior architecture, landscape, furniture, graphics, and naming and branding, and stage sets. He has been visiting faculty and critic at many colleges for over 25 years and is currently on the board of studies at SIT Tumkur. With this, I invite him to begin the lecture. So over to you.
Thank you, Shalini. When Salila kindly invited me to give this talk, I was quite nervous actually, because I'm not really an expert at anything. But I do love stories and I love jokes. I'm not sure which one this will be. I'll leave it to you. What I have been doing mostly is I've been observing things in my own way, listening, seeing, and reading. I've lived all of my life in cities, so that's been kind of my playground and my laboratory. In the 1860s, Baudelaire, the French writer, described a kind of person, the flâner, who was an exemplar of the modern city dweller. And Walter Benjamin, the Marxist thinker, he developed this idea of flânery as a tool to analyze and understand urban life. So he believed that the city revealed itself to the wandering eye of the flâner. And the absence of the agenda made that his observations were detached. But he was undoubtedly also a part of everything that he observed. So this dialectic between observer and participant defined his wanderings. The flâner typically was privileged, being educated and aware of history. And what he was doing was he was experiencing the city and covertly looking for adventure, and usually aesthetic adventure. I was not yet a flâner, or what Bangaloreans call loafer. Yeah. So, I was born to some privilege. My grandfather, Subbarao, was government architect from 1947 to 48. The picture on the left is a plaque in the BBMP office, which shows the list of government architects. So it starts off with Krumbigal, then Lakshmi Narasappa, who is in fact architect Jaisim's grandfather, Königsberger, and Subbarao was my grandfather. During my grandfather's tenure, the layout of Jayanagar was formed, 1948, but he died of cancer soon after that. And because of that, his widow, who was my grandmother, was given a plot of land in Jayanagar first block near Ashoka Pillar. And that's where I spent my early childhood in the 60s. Bangalore was known as the pensioner's paradise then, which basically meant that nothing exciting ever happened. The weather was lovely and people came here to chill until they died. It was also called, and sometimes still is called, the Garden City. That same famous weather, the fabulous red soil. We had a tradition of totas, and of course the gardens of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan all created a city which was literally growing all the time. I grew up around 400 meters away from Lal Bagh, so climbing trees, feeding the deer, making stones skip on the lake. Life was a permanent picnic. Loafing meant getting to know the neighborhood, flying kites at fourth block. At that time, the complex wasn't there. It was an open Maidan. Making clay marbles at Siddhapura Tank, walking to school. My school was Saraswati Vidya Mandira in those days. And this meant that I could also spend a few hours without parents or siblings supervising me. So over time, as a little kid, I knew where the fruit trees for stealing were, where the empty plots where we could get up to mischief were. I knew where the street dogs lived, so I could play with them. And I could make new friends to challenge them at tops, gilli dandlu, or marbles. So today, that's what we call rounding or hanging out with the area boys. So as a little kid, I started exploring my urban environment in a very small way. But the young are restless. And then soon I had a new weapon of Flannery. This is my rally bicycle. The bicycle was a great force multiplier, and my city suddenly grew much larger. My school, Bishop Cotton's, was now 5 kilometers away, and I had to cycle every day to school. But I could be out all day without anyone knowing or anyone worrying. And then I started seeing street patterns. I started recognizing landmarks so that I wouldn't get lost. I started understanding weather patterns. I knew whether I had to carry a raincoat or not. I started identifying safe and dangerous localities, ghettos, squatter settlements, and discovering local festivals where I could join the crowd and maybe get some free prasada. So I started becoming a citizen. In secondary school, my two best friends and I, we jointly owned a pet snake. He was rescued from a king cobra, which was going to have it for lunch. And so we brought him home. It was a checkered keelback, and we called him Nautilus because he was a water snake. I used to carry him to school every day inside my shirt, as, of course, going on my bicycle. And it was great fun because I could scare people, including the teachers. There was a small logistical problem. My snake needed a steady supply of live frogs for food. So I had to go on that bicycle looking for frogs. So soon I knew every lake, stream, and every large open well in Bangalore, in South Bangalore. I learned all about topography, watersheds, valleys, low points, swales, marshes, all because I had to catch frogs for my snake. Then in the 70s, we moved to Durwani Nagar, that was ITI colony. At the time, Bangalore was so-called public sector capital of India. The Nehruvian dream of scientific self-sufficiency resulted in the establishment of all these various public sector companies. There was ITI, there was HAL, BEL, BML, NGF, HMT, Watch Factory, and I don't know, maybe many more. So this actually kind of defined the nature of Bangalore in the 70s. It was middle class, government employed, organized, and it just ran very smoothly. What you see on the right was what ITI made. Those telephones and the telephone exchanges below, these were what we considered high tech in those days. If you had a colored telephone, you were a boss. Others were all black. So we lived in the colony, and the colony was like a small microcosm of urban life, except it was much greener. We had lots of trees and gardens and parks. But it also had social hierarchies which rolled over from the factory, which made life a little complicated because your status in the society depended on your father's status in the factory. Um, but we did have our own shops, markets, sports facilities. There was even a school there. Now I had to commute 12 kilometers to school. So that meant taking the bus. So this is what our BTS buses looked like in those days, the Bangalore Transport Service. I had the option of taking the ITI colony bus, but if I missed it, which I often did because I was playing cricket or football or something after school, then we had no option but to take the BTS bus. This was my route, and it was what was called a Mofussil route, which meant that the bus would probably be full of sacks of grain, vegetables, chickens, sometimes even a goat. So this is where we learned Solpar Just Madi. It was born here. it used to cost me 35 paise from Residency Road to Krishna Rajpuram. So it was a lot of money in those days. But we also decided that we were going to hack that. So what we did is that we used to ditch the bus, me and my friends, and we used to walk home. Mind you, this is 12 kilometers. It would take us more than 2 hours. So what did we do? We had that 35 paisa we had saved by not taking the bus. So 5 paisa bought a fishing hook, and 30 paisa was spent on buying sweets. These are called bullseyes. They were big, hard sweets which would stay in your mouth for a long, long time. And all we needed was to get a stick from somewhere along the way home. Because what we do is that our route would be from Residency Road down to MG Road. On the corner of MG Road, there was a ruined bungalow, which today is the Taj. So we'd hang around there for some time. Then we'd take a left turn, go towards Alsur Lake. And on the right-hand side, there was another ruined house, which is called the Bhoot Bangla. It was called Begum Mahal. Today, that's the Conrad. And from there, we'd walk along Murphy Town, Old Madras Road, and stop at Tin Factory, because Tin Factory at that time, there was a lake which came all the way up to Old Madras Road on one side, and there were paddy fields on the other side. So we'd stop there with our stick and a fishing hook, go into the paddy fields, look for earthworms, catch an earthworm, put it on the hook, and try to catch fish. We never caught anything big enough to eat, though. So yeah, so that's how life was. I think in the 70s. In the 80s, I was away at architecture school at Ahmedabad, and I returned to Bangalore only for the summer vacations, which was a good 2.5 months long. But I did get the ultimate flanner weapon, the camera. So this was the first love of my life, an honest to God, fully manual, fully metal, practically indestructible SLR camera. And this opened up everything for me. So below is a famous quote from Susan Sontag. The photographer is an armed version of the solitary walker, reconnoitering, stalking, cruising the urban inferno, the voyeuristic stroller who discovers the city as a landscape of voluptuous extremes, adept of the joys of watching, converser of empathy. The flanner finds the world picturesque. This is Susan Sontag. So armed with my camera, I have spent years just roaming around Bangalore, just looking at things, looking at people. These pictures, I think, are from Oaklipuram. And so you look at all kinds of things. You look at colors, you look at patterns, you look at buildings, you look at people, you look at what they do, you look at industry. It's endlessly fascinating. Sometimes you get an occasional picture like this, which really tells a story, and it's so embedded with all the elements of urban life. You have water and the value of water, how essential that water tank is. If you look in the inner city areas, all water tanks have got paintings of gods and goddesses on them. And the kind of way in which mundane life and sacred life are so completely intertwined. Okalipuram is actually a beautiful fabric where you can observe a lot of these things. There are shops which are run by trans people. There are no lines at all between all communities, religions, everybody just living together in harmony. So you see events, you see accidents, you see juxtapositions, you see contrasts, you'll see harmony. Bangalore has also been obsessed with the movies. At its peak in the 70s and 80s, Kempegowda Road alone had 14 single screen theaters. And they showed Kannada, English, Tamil, Hindi, and Telugu films. This was a remarkable index of the polyglot population of Bangalore. We were finally a true city. We were truly cosmopolitan. In the 80s, something interesting happened. Codes was the first company to start making draft beer, and quickly followed by UB, which made Kingfisher. Now, draft beer has to be consumed very, very quickly. And this actually developed what we now call the pub culture of the 90s, which was synonymous with Bangalore. Bangalore became pub city. As young architects in those days, we also designed many pubs, including this one. This was called 19 Church Street. The liberalization of the economy in the 90s coincided with the widespread use of computers, and the IT service industry was born in Bangalore. We had a large population of well-educated, largely English-speaking engineering graduates, and they found high-paying jobs doing both on-site and outsourced work for foreign companies. This made a huge difference from the steady but poorly paid jobs which the government-run public sector typified Bangalore as. On the flip side, we also started seeing for the first time long hours, stress, commutes, backaches, RSIs, that's repetitive stress injuries, high infertility rates, high divorce rates that still persist. Bangalore had finally come up to speed. So this is a 200-seater software office which we designed in ITPL, which is in fact probably the first mega office building in India, in Bangalore. Until that time, we never saw really large office complexes. With living standards up and lots of global exposure and plenty of disposable income, we are now the city of choice for lifestyle product launches, cars, cosmetics, consumer electronics. When somebody wants to launch something new, they always start off at Bangalore. The market is tested with Bangalore because we apparently have an appetite for new things, for innovation. We are adventurous and we are young. So Bangalore now has also the dubious label of hipster central, with organic cafes, artisanal breweries, chocolates, baked goods, cheeses, cured meats. This is an artisanal chocolate factory and cafe that we designed in Jaipur. In my own neighborhood, which is Cooktown, if you throw a stone, it'll probably hit either a baker, a graphic designer, a yoga instructor, or a ceramicist. So that's the way Bangalore has changed now. So this is very interesting because this also implies there's a lost connect that people feel with humanity, with small tactile things, with personal things, with unique things. So where are we headed? And more importantly, where do we want to go? What kind of direction are we going to look for ourselves to develop this city? In 1887, the German philosopher Ferdinand Tönnies, he made a distinction between what he called Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft as two different ways of engaging with the world. So these can be translated in different ways, usually as community and society, mutual, industry. But basically, if you just see the set of dualities there, Gemeinschaft refers to a group of individuals mainly characterized by a sense of common identity, close personal relationships, and an attachment to traditional and sentimental concerns. Whereas Gesellschaft refers to a group of people mainly characterized by impersonal relations, formal organizations, the absence of generally held or binding norms, and a detachment from traditional and sentimental concerns. So then again, in Gemeinschaft, emotions and sentiments drive social ties and interactions. Whereas in Gesellschaft, rationality is the driving factor. Gemeinschaft has implicit rules, they're not stated. Gesellschaft has explicit rules, which are just laid out there for everybody. Gemeinschaft is common in rural, small-scale, homogeneous societies, and Gesellschaft common in large-scale, industrial, and cosmopolitan societies. Gemeinschaft achieves its equilibrium through morals, social control, and conformism, while Gesellschaft achieves it through laws, police, tribunals, and prisons. So this is, of course, a fairly extreme characterization. And we are obviously on a spectrum, and there's always a mix of both of these two happening at any point of time. So given that the city, the urban, is the locus of opportunity, secularity, anonymity, technology, and development, at the same time, it has the potential of loss for community, identity, social bonds, tradition, and self-determination. Are there ways in which we can address this dichotomy of modern life? Architects and even planners have limited agency in the creation of the built environment. There are only so many things that we can do. We have limited knowledge too, and the number of data points as well as their integrity is suspect. We're not sure of the quality of the raw material that we have to work with. Attempts to create mathematical or game theory or regression based models have been completely inadequate. uh, Rational means of analysis have not really been very successful. There have been a lot of models from Christopher Alexander to various mathematical models and different ways of trying to create an analog of society, which could then be used to study how design could actually be used to intervene that. The parameters that we have to deal with are so varied and so enormous, and many of them don't have metrics. We have no way of measuring them. So, but of course, this has never prevented architects from trying. And here's another attempt. If you look at old photos of Bangalore, what is the first thing that you notice? There are no cars. So if you see the picture on the top right, that's MG Road. When I was a child in the 70s, I've even gone roller skating on MG Road. You can't imagine that today. On Sunday mornings, there used to be drag racing, which happened there. So cars and trucks and things that go. How do we address cars? So this is a suggestion. Reduce priority for individual transport, especially cars. Encourage walking and cycling in that order. Separate high speed and low speed transit. Make safer neighborhoods. Reduce commutes. Encourage mixed use and work from home. Develop the culture of maintenance and repair. I'm sure all of you have seen this picture. It's absolutely true. The amount of space of the city which is occupied by different modes of transport. So what's the good stuff that we can get? Safety for pedestrians, differently able and cyclists, better physical and mental health, less pollution, chemical pollution, noise pollution, visual pollution, more time for leisure and self-fulfillment, and reduce the burden on the Earth's resources. It may not be possible to do away with private vehicles, but we can certainly care more for people than cars as designers. For a real Mailari dosa, you have to travel to Nazarbad, Mysore, and go to some place like the Vinayaka Hotel, the old original Vinayaka Hotel, which is more than 80 years old. You can eat all you want for 30 rupees. They close at 11 o'clock in the morning. They are not interested in making more money. The dosas are the best you can get. They are soft, they melt in your mouth, and they're filled not with potato iruli palya, but with sagu. And the chutney is brilliant. On the other hand, you have AAB, A to B. What do you get there? Bland, standardized, centrally produced, and completely forgettable food. The food and the experience are both forgettable. What would you choose? So there's a big case for keeping things small. Avoid mega projects in the city. Encourage local business, not big brand, big box retail. Strengthen local bodies and RWAs. Encourage self-determination in neighborhoods. Avoid monoculture. Maintain architectural diversity. We always talk about biodiversity, but perhaps it's equally important to have architectural diversity. How do you create a rich, meaningful visual environment. Corporations are becoming more powerful than governments, and public good is being replaced by shareholder profits. Bigger is better, and numbers rule in many, many different ways, whether it's eyeballs, likes, retweets. In architecture, we talk about footfalls. How many footfalls does your building get? Does your mall get? Does your shop get? So the success of malls, supermarkets, and even temple complexes, like the ISKCON temple up there, that's huge, are measured with a clicker. And the footfalls are conflated with their desirability and therefore their value. So do we make an unconscious correlation between how popular something it is and how good it is, of high quality is it? So can you question this? So what happens? We reduce cross-urban travel because we don't have so many destinations. We encourage a circular economy, local production, local consumption. We maintain a sense of belonging and mattering, the fact that my activities, my products, my services make a difference. We allow for personal identity and self-expression, and we enjoy the vibrancy and diversity of urban life. And importantly, we balance opportunity and refuge in a hyper-local manner. The city has always been the locus of opportunity. Why do people come to the city? Because they get opportunity. So it's very important that our design considerations include the fact that we have to create opportunity of all kinds. In Rome, in the entry of McDonald's was met with popular resistance. In Zurich, in fact, when I was studying there, the first outlet of McDonald's was burned down by students. The fight against corporate fast food gave rise to the slow food movement. So the slow food movement has spread all over the world, and even in Bangalore, there are many slow food practitioners. So to value local against global, the particular against the common, experience over speed, life over serving industry, individual over corporation. But in India, by and large, we are still moving in the opposite direction. The aspiration is still, I want a KFC, I want a McDonald's. I'm sorry, I seem to have missed a slide. Just a moment. No, it's okay. Okay, I'm good. So how do you feed your head and your body? Balance the density of built-up urban morphology with greenery. It could be purposeful, like urban agriculture, or it could even just be undefined leisure space. Then you valorize cultural institutions, libraries, schools. There are different ways in which we can make these of value in our design, both positionally, location, where are they located, and architectonic, how are they expressed as buildings. The next thing we can do is we blur the lines between inside and outside, private and public. Can we respect property lines by usage, by function, and not by walls and fences? The juice is always in the gaps. The best things in life always happen at the junctions, at the spaces in between discrete things. Then can we create spaces that can be occupied both statically and dynamically? So there are some spaces that we move through, that we walk through, and there are other places where we reside, we dwell, we stop for a while. And we need spaces which do not require consumer behavior. Is there a place in your neighborhood where you can meet a friend which is not sitting at a CCD? Is there a place where you can do nothing and nobody's going to bother you? The other thing we need to do is we need to engage with local history, with local traditions and mythology. And all three of these have different importances in different situations. So we need to distinguish between history, tradition, and mythology, because all three work very, very differently in the way they weave the urban fabric together. We can also use iconography, we can use color, we can use motion and spectacle to animate daily life. There are various forms of art which can be, again, very much a part of the community. We also, of course, need to make occasions for urban sport and fitness activities that don't require a stadium. So the top left, the Google Earth image is actually my neighborhood. So we are organized around a triangular park. The park is really small. It's only each side of the triangle is about 50 meters. It's too small for jogging, but it does support walking. There's a gang of people who clap every morning there. There are couples who can't romance anywhere else, so they come here. And we have an incredible number of songbirds. We have quails, we have bulbuls, we have bee eaters, crow pheasants, kimbuta, and flower peckers. Urban sports do not require too much space, number one. They don't require large space. They don't necessarily require dedicated space. They can actually be woven into the fabric of the city. When I was young, the aspirations of society, the aspirations of people was to be cultured, committed, noble, and so on. These kind of values are best embedded in a society's formal institutions, not in commercial ones. If you don't have cultural institutions, societal formal institutions, and all you're left with commerce, it takes society down a dark path. Libraries and schools in particular, they are totems. They are symbolic reminders of our values. And yes, size does not matter. The essence of civitas or urban life is the negotiation between public and private. If you see these pictures, these are, I think, mostly from Gujarat, but you get the idea. I couldn't, unfortunately, go out thanks to COVID and take pictures here. But you see that, can you contrast these pictures with typical life in an apartment tower or in a gated community? These are the antithesis of urban life. You cannot get the benefits of a community, that is safety, conversations, everyday help, cooperation, without giving up some privilege and some privacy. So this negotiation is always mediated by architecture. This is one place where we have a lot of agency. So yes, it's a human thing. The city belongs to everybody. So as a designer, I think we have a commitment to give special attention to non-majoritarian, non-normative people. They are especially vulnerable and they are often the victims of poor design. We cannot repeat this enough. Poor design victimizes people. This includes women, the elderly, the differently able, minority communities, LGBTQ, and yeah, I'm sure there are lots others. So we have a special responsibility towards them. When architecture cannot actually create a community, it can, at best, it can accommodate, it can enable, and it can reinforce community values. At its worst, it can actually help create dysfunction, oppression, depression, alienation, all the horrible things. Because the large capital expenditure and material consumption it entails, we are in a very, very costly business. Architecture is naturally aligned with the hegemonic structure of the age: power, wealth, and class. The people we design for, the consumers of architecture, very often do not have these privileges. So who is the client? This is a question we must constantly ask ourselves. Whom are we designing for? who is the client. Empathy is usually, nowadays it's a big fashion to talk about design thinking, and everybody and anybody, including corporates, are all doing design thinking. And the first point of design thinking is always empathy. It starts with empathy. Is there a way we can actually cultivate empathy as learning for ourselves and as pedagogy to teach others? So it's very, very important to do this. Can architects subvert the requirements of a brief to align with natural principles of socio-economic justice? So very often you may be in a situation where you have to design something to keep somebody happy. And that's something which you need to do, does not agree with your sense of values or your sense of fairness. Will you do it? Is there a smart way in which you can apparently keep everybody happy while still actually acting on your values? So this is what I call design as hacking. Can we hack the brief, interpret it cleverly in a manner that it actually promotes social well-being? Celebrations, festivals, and even collective mourning of loss, these are all essential to maintain a sense of belonging and social identity. Sharing is being human. Architects need patronage, which means that they typically serve power and wealth. But we are also humans living in a society. Where do our responsibilities lie? We are in a kind of an odd situation. We are insiders in the business of creating the city. We do have some knowledge and some skills. Can we ethically hack the system to create desirable outcomes for everybody? Or is it a human thing? Data and smart cities. The promise of the smart city is one of techno-utopia. The idea is that sensors and cameras will be embedded everywhere, and they will feed petabytes of data through all these miles of optic fiber cable, which right now they're digging up our roads for. And these are all going to these really, really powerful computers, which are going to run AI, machine learning programs. And the city is going to be just great. This will help us to regulate traffic, transportation, energy management, water supply, sanitation, healthcare, policing, all of this. Now all of these kind of things actually work on parametric algorithms, just as we use parametricism in architecture. But most machine learning programs actually work on a principle of, what's the word for it? Antagonistic programs. So they have two programs, one which generates options and the other one which tries to break them down. And they work so fast that they work much faster than our human brains do. So in a sense, we are giving up control. The algorithms are already working in ways which are beyond human computation. So the important thing then becomes, who decides these parameters? Who takes the calls for real response when a generated AI result has to be translated into real action, whether it's policing or whether it's putting up a building? Who takes that decision? Who owns the infrastructure and who owns the data? Do we have access to our own data? Can we be forgotten? Do we have privacy? And in all of this, will architects become obsolete? Will communities become powerless? What is not discussed in all the discussions of smart cities, at least in India, is that how bad is the loss of privacy? How bad is the loss of identity? Are we going to be vulnerable to data losses, to people hacking into the system? Already in the US, military simulations of urban scenarios are classifying architecture based on the challenges of urban warfare and how difficult it is to sanitize a building. So what they're doing is that they're actually making 3D models, of course, of entire cities. And they're trying to see that if there is a terrorist attack, how will the defense forces come in, which is the easiest way for them to enter. how porous are the buildings? How can they get from one place to the other? How can they go up and down from street level to the upper levels? And some of the findings are actually very interesting. That, for instance, that floor plates are not a problem for a military counterattack, but walls are. So there's a very real possibility that even architecture is going to start being ruled by programs which tell you that you need to do things in a certain way. And in all of this, is it going to help a schoolboy walk home, squish around in the mud, catching earthworms for bait, and trying to catch fish with a mouth full of bullseyes? So that's a beautiful picture, and it kind of depicts what a smart city might be. Yeah, it looks lovely, doesn't it? But it also reminds me of a movie I saw called The Truman Show, where Jim Carrey, he discovers that actually his entire life from the day he was born has been live streamed on television as a reality show. So every moment, whether he's eating, sleeping, flirting, farting, it's all being streamed live on TV. All the friends, the family, strangers he meets are all actors, and they're working to a script. The entire built fabric of the town is a movie set with cameras everywhere. So is this utopia or dystopia? To a small disclosure, I actually love cars. I own 7 of them, and I love driving. I love big buildings. I love designing big buildings even more. I visit malls quite a bit. I play my music really loud. I don't talk to my phone. I don't talk to my computer. I steal my son's anime sometimes. I am deeply conflicted about the environmental damage that people, including me, are responsible for. And this presentation is a curated viewpoint which can be safely ignored. Questions? I love them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful discourse. I'd like to open the floor for questions now. Anybody, students maybe?
So Dinesh, just to get the students started, or just to kind of get the
Sure.
questions rolling, thanks
Right.
for a wonderful talk, and yeah, tracing the growth and the development of the city, of the story of the city itself through your own story. I thought that was very seamlessly done, and it was beautiful. And so, yeah, you highlighted the conflicts that architects face, right? And a lot of images and imagery that you projected was in the public realm, and that's what we talk about as, especially in the context of this particular studio, right? We're talking about urban context and architectural design in the context of the public realm, and that
Right.
reflects at the best and the worst of a city, right? As we all know, I mean, all the opportunities for public life,
Right.
collective life at its worst or its best. And there are the contradictions of the architect also as someone that needs a patron, and there has to be a patron. It could be the government, it could
Yes.
be a private client,
Yes.
could be
Yes.
anyone. So there is already that conflict there, the public realm, and there's the patronage angle to it. And you talked about the idea of subversion. Uh, have you seen instances of
Mhm.
these subversions in your own project? Is there any example that you'd like to talk about, or anything else that you see?
uh, no, I'll tell you. For one thing, our projects, I should say, have by and large been very modest. We have never actually done large projects, partly by design, partly as consequence. Because when there's a certain path that you embark on, you don't get large projects. So that is it's a direct consequence. So no, personally, I would not say that. But yeah, I think that probably we have tried by and large to uh, we have subversively done things like we have maintained old buildings. We have seen that trees are not cut. We've seen that boundary walls are not erected as far as possible. We've tried to keep things as open as possible and not create this enclosed kind of a situation where you are disconnected from the city. So I think the immediacy, if you see even, it may not be the best example, but if you look at the Ganjam jewelry store on Vittal Malia Road, so there, even though it's a jewelry store, which typically normally is very opaque from the outside. You see, most jewelry stores, they're very, because it's a security concern. But we actually went to enormous trouble to make these large windows so that you can look inside, so that there is a communication that happens between the outside and the inside. We again had no compound wall. The pavement rolls all the way up to the store.
Okay.
So that there is, you can, so the idea being that anybody can walk in. You may not be able to afford a 20 lakh piece of jewelry, but there's nothing to prevent you from walking up and looking at it. So I mean, these are small ways in which we do it. We avoid loud signage. We avoid a lot of things which are visual noise in a way, really. Yeah, and we have also refused many projects because it didn't suit our values. So yes, I wouldn't call that hacking, but I think it is something that you commit to engaging with. And sure, we all fail sometimes, and that's okay. So I think as long as we're moving in a direction, there are going to be projects which we completely are not happy with. It's all right.
Thanks. Questions, guys? Anyone? Switch on your videos, some of you at least, please. So we know that you're there. So Ar.Dinesh, while again they switch on the videos, can I try?
Right.
So as you know, in our studio, I'm going to ask you a studio specific question. So we are studying Vasant Nagar and Chamrajpet, which are fairly disparate neighborhoods, right? Would you like to share any experiences from those two places?
Well, my great grandfather's house is in Chamrajpet. It's on Fourth
Okay.
Main.
Yeah.
This house still exists, but only a small part of it exists. Over the years, it's been divided up and it's been concreted and all of that. But yes, the house still exists. So I have memories of Chamrajpet. I don't go there very often. But Chamrajpet for me always meant these long, narrow houses with courtyards, dark on the inside, kadapa stone floors, timber roofs. There would always be a well in one of the courtyards. So typically there'd be at least two courtyards in the house, and one of it would have a well. And we come from a very conservative Brahmin tradition, so a lot of it was tied with what we call muddy and musre. So it's very embedded with a lot of cultural, religious kind of practice. So it's very hard for me to separate it. That's part of the reason I think people don't go back also to Chamrajpet, is because they don't want to kind of engage with that part of our past where it's there are lots of problems, patriarchy. In fact, my grandmother, when my grandfather died, my grandmother was actually going to be forced to shave her head and not wear a blouse and all of those horrible things. So my father said, to hell with you, I'm taking you out of here, and my family moved out at that point of time from Chamrajpet. So architecture is very tied up with this whole thing. So in terms of an experience, I would say yes, we had these huge pavements, broad. They were really, really broad pavements, and we used to play a lot there. And we had the jugglies. We always had the verandas and the jugglies. So the old people would be sitting there and playing maybe chess or sitting and reading the newspaper. And there was always that kind of a conversation which happened at the street. So, but it was also very, very gendered, I should say, because the women were always inside. So there are many, many layers actually of that. So,
and how about
urban space is very, very highly gendered. Yeah,
definitely, our public spaces continue to be fairly gendered. Yeah. And Vasant Nagar?
Vasant Nagar, I'm not so familiar with, but it's kind of very odd. It's a kind of a leftover space, really, in a way, because what happened is that I think when the British cantonment was set up, the The army came, they marched all the way from Chennai, and they brought in their wake a whole lot of traders, suppliers, the the Mudalyas. They all came with the army essentially from Tamil Nadu. And since the army was camped on the banks of Alsur Lake, and they launched the attack on the Bangalore fort with that as a base, so this entire portion of Bangalore, north of the ridge, I would say, was pretty much occupied by the British and the people who supplied to the British, which meant that most of the land around Vasant Nagar and also was actually belonged to the Mudalyas, in fact. Number one. Number two is that a large part of the area was actually lake and marshland. Right until my childhood. I mean, Miller's Tank, it was Miller's Tank Bund Road. There's no tank left at all now.
Right, true.
So it's all filled in. You have Jasma Bhavan, you have Badminton Association, you have all of these things. But that was a lake. And Miller's Road was actually the embankment which created the lake. If you look on the left side of Miller's Road and see Vasant Nagar village, it's considerably below the road level.
Okay.
Right. So I'm not very familiar with the specific urban history of Vasant Nagar, but it's a kind of an infill area where because that land was available and the surrounding areas were quite expensive real estate, so people had kind of encroached into land which would otherwise not be considered so buildable or so desirable. So it's because of a shortage of land, really, in a way that it's happened. So yeah. So I mean, there are a few things. There are a couple of old temples and things which probably kind of date back to earlier. But,
that's one thing we noticed about both areas when the little walking that we did was the undulation, the great difference in the gradient. There were sharp drops and walking down Loafers Lane and definitely. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So even the institutions you see around there, whether it's a school and all that, they're Mudalyar institutions by and large.
That is true. The NGMA also, right? It's the Manik Whale Mansion. So that's the
absolutely.
original structure. Okay, questions, guys?
Hello, sir. I'm Janvi, and first of all, thank you for the talk. And even the first part of the talk, it felt very nostalgic because my grandfather used to tell stories like this about Bangalore, and so the question comes from that place. You talked about some of these places in MG Road which have now become something else, like where there was that ruined bungalow and something else. So, what do you think? Prominent or jarring changes that you saw in Bangalore, you lived through those changes, so any of those?
And so Janvi,
continue, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the
go ahead.
Specifically with respect to that Miller's Tank, which was do you remember exactly when that thing was infilled, or any news during the time? And because you did say that whole area was like the lake, and we did also read about that the lake.
So referring to Miller's Tank, I'm not quite sure because I think even when I was a boy, the tank was already gone. Miller's Tank Bund was there, but I don't remember seeing a lake there. Of course, I don't remember very well because there was Cantonment Station, and what was there in front of Cantonment Station? The veterinary hospital was there. That was the only veterinary hospital in Bangalore at the time there. So I would say probably maybe in the 60s itself, the lake must have gone. Possibly, because I saw those areas only from about the 70s onwards. So it was probably already gone by then. And coming to your bigger question, it's very interesting, Janvi, because life goes on and progress happens. And progress, there are a lot of things which we gain from progress, and there are some things which we lose from progress. So I think it's a constant exercise for everybody, including us as designers, to kind of sift through this and actually see where is the progress positive and where is it negative, and can we kind of exaggerate those differences so that we push it in one direction. I mean, like I said, I don't know if I mentioned, but we never had television until 1980. in Bangalore. So I grew up my entire childhood without television. And because my father was in ITI, I was one of the very few privileged people who had a telephone at home. Others people did not have telephones. So in this day and age, it is impossible for you to imagine what that life was like. It's actually impossible. So I have to also accept the tremendous benefits that progress has brought to us. It has really brought us a lot of progress. It's been good. I am not against technology. I think technology is wonderful, but we have to always be careful about who is controlling it, because it's being controlled by somebody. So I think it's very, very important, especially when you're an actor at an urban level, to be kind of politically and economically aware. Uh, as Salila and I were discussing, we don't always have a choice about who's going to pay us, who's our patron. But I think that sensitivity, if you can bring it when we are designing, is something which can only improve the design. Yeah. I mean, there is a very obvious example which I showed there of the Central Vista, which right now has become a huge controversy thanks to COVID. So people are saying, why are you spending 20,000 crores on that when that money can be used for so many other things? But if you put aside that very obvious question, it's a very obvious question. If you put aside that question, then you start asking other questions which are very interesting too. That what is the value of that project? What is the symbolic value of it? Can one put a monetary figure on that? What does it mean to have national pride? What does it mean to use architecture as an instrument of national pride? There are precursors. You go back to Nazi architecture, you go back to Albert Speer. Over history, many, many times where people have had to face these dilemmas and say, am I designing in a manner which promotes a certain value? So these are interesting questions for us to ask. I mean, if you look at Vidhan Sauda, what do you think of it? Do you like it? Do you feel proud of it?
I do like it, but I've not seen it that I've not pondered on this question, like whether I like it or not.
You're an architect, you must ponder on these things. Yeah. Yeah, because it's very, very, again, it's a similar issue that where you build something which looks like a palace and you have a palace which represents a democracy. So what is an architecture for democracy? Is that, are we replacing the king with another king in effect? Hmm? So these are questions which a designer has to consider. So changes, yes, there have been lots and lots and lots of changes in Bangalore. There are too many to list. But I think nostalgia is also a trap. So one has to actually be a little more objective in kind of breaking down the elements of that nostalgia and see what in that has value. Where is the juice? Where is the juice? So I would say yes, getting to spend time with your friends is a great thing. Getting to play physical games rather than video games is a great thing. Can I actually break down what are the things in that nostalgia which are of value and which are relevant to my life today? We don't want to make a museum. We don't want to have fossils all over the place. Life is dynamic. It's changing all the time. We have to change and move with it. We all are going to use computers. We are all going to use artificial intelligence. We are all going to use machine learning. There's no doubt about it. It's not avoidable. And it's not all a bad thing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, my question was like, how has the experience on the street changed since, from those times? And is pedestrianizing the streets the only solution to avoid these traffic problems and stuff like this? Overpopulation of vehicles.
Very good questions and very practical ones. Yeah. So yeah, how have things changed? Well, yes, I'll tell you one thing. When I was a kid, our cars could not go very fast. We had an old Fiat. It could go only up to about 80 kilometers per hour. Okay. My car today can go up to 140 or 150. Traffic speeds have gone up really high. And what that means is that it's dangerous to cross a road. So that's one way in which things have changed a lot. If you really see, crossing a road now is only for young people. I actually have friends who have caught auto rickshaws just to get to the other side of the road. Can you imagine that? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, okay. So can you imagine? I've had friends who have caught auto rickshaws because they couldn't walk across the road.
Yeah.
Now that's an
It's-
extreme. That is an extreme.
Yeah. So what
Yeah.
would be the solution
So,
according to you?
yeah.
I'm
What
not
would the
asking
solution
the
be?
right. Yeah. What
Yeah.
would the solution
Yeah.
be?
No, so yeah, so obviously this is a big question. It's a big question. There is no one answer to this.
Yeah.
The easy answer is public transport. Public transport. Because you saw that little picture I put up there, how much space the bus occupies, how many people it carries, how much space cars take, and how many people they carry. It's all there in that picture. You can see very clearly. So public transport is the most efficient way, which means that you have the least density on the road of vehicles. If you have more buses, you will have very few cars and very few two-wheelers. Number one. Number one. That's the easy answer, that increase public transport. There are other drastic ways of doing it, like they do in Singapore, where they will restrict the ownership of cars. Let's say only if you meet 1, 2, 3, 4 criteria, can you own a car? Otherwise, you can't own a car. Okay, that's another way of doing it. And the third way is like in London, where they have a congestion tax. That if you own a car in certain zones of London, if you drive your car into the central business district, you pay for it. It costs you. So they disincentivize using your own car, so that you are forced or you are pressured into taking public transport. That's another way of doing it. What I'm talking about here is a much deeper way of doing it, where you reduce the need for commuting. Can we, as architects and planners, reduce the need for people to travel so much? Right? What is your daily commute, for instance? How far away from the college do you stay?
I stay in hostel, but my commute would be metros as of now in Bangalore. Metro, and now we are getting more of on this.
So actually, what so what you're saying is that hostels are a good
hostels
idea,
are a good
actually,
idea
isn't
to
it?
avoid commuting. Yeah.
Yeah. So think like a designer and think, how can I reduce commutes? Which is why we're talking about mixed activity, work from home, denser neighborhoods. There are many design strategies that we can develop for that. Well, this is in our control. It's in our hands. We can do that. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So I have a question. So our brief this time again, it deals with conviviality, and I wanted to ask something on those lines. So we know that for buildings and all, there's the code books, there's NBC. So along the lines of conviviality, is there something that's available in codes, and as architects, is there something we can exploit or take advantage of, bring in such a thing in our design?
I don't know if you realized it, but this is a very big question that you asked. Because what is the purpose of codes? What is the purpose of a code? So you remember what I spoke about Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft? So yeah, so code books belong to Gesellschaft, and we are talking Gemeinschaft. So this is a basic dichotomy, number one. Number two, who writes the code? Who writes the code?
So like the
Some bunch
government
of
body.
experts sitting in some institution, right? right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So what are they trying to achieve? Why are they writing the code?
To sort of, I don't know, bring order to things and make sure that everything follows a set of rules. And I suppose.
So why is there a need for that? Why is there a need for that?
In a manner to ensure that there's safety and when people don't exploit it. And
So the assumption is that if they don't do it, people will exploit it and it will be unsafe. That people need to be controlled. Yeah. So this is actually the big question, which you may not have realized, but this is actually the core of the issue. The core of the issue is that who is setting up the laws? Why are they setting it up? Now, in the typical Gesellschaft way of thinking, is that order, like you said, control. If you remember, police, prisons were all in Gesellschaft, not in Gemeinschaft. In Gemeinschaft, law and order is maintained by social contract. Right? You shame somebody, you don't put them in jail. You throw shade at someone, you don't lock them up. You see the difference? So all code, all bylaws are what I call defensive. They are assuming that people are bad. They are assuming that people are cheats. They are assuming that people don't know what's good for them. They assume that people are stupid. And they are trying to prevent you from cocking things up. You see that? That is the mentality. And so it's an administrative mentality, it's a colonial mentality. That's a, you poor natives, you need for me to come and sort your life out for you because you can't do it yourself. So this is the big challenge. So how have we moved from a self-administered, self-managed, self-organized community to a situation where some babu sitting in one office somewhere, literally throws a book at you and say, follow this. That is the situation. We have made that change from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft. So now we need to see how we can hack the code and come back towards community. Yeah?
right, sir.
Make
Thank you,
sense?
sir. Yes.
Hello, sir. I'm Brinda, and my question is quite specific about the point that you made about colonies and vataras, like where we had housing units and also a lot of smaller amenities together.
Right.
But similar to that, in present day, we also see these tall apartments coming in with all the other facilities with it again. But both of the dynamics differ a lot. But why do you think when we already had these colonies or vataras, there was a change to sort of shift to these sort of apartments? And why are people making that choice to sort of go into these apartments rather than
It's
um,
just
being
two
in the...
words, land value. Land value. So the way the dynamics of real estate, they result in the kind of architecture that you get. So it's really a function of that. When your land values are high, you can't afford to have large plots of land. You have no choice but to go vertical. I'll tell you, when I lived in ITI colony, the bungalow, my father's bungalow alone had a 2-acre garden. 2 acres. Can you imagine? Impossible. Impossible. Why? Because the government owned it. So availability of land, value of land, and the FSI. These three things actually determine the kind of morphology which the city develops.
So
And this again, in fact, is tied up with the code. So combination of all these things together will decide whether you have individual bungalows, whether you have group housing, whether you have apartments, whether you have super blocks. It all depends on many of these things. But they are boiled down by and large to money.
Yeah. So now when we see like these very similar kind of apartments everywhere, so how do we bring in that architectural diversity that you spoke of? Like almost the entire city is covered with apartments now. So now if you have to change the entire city's urban fabric to sort of bring in that diversity, uh, uh, won't it be like a difficult challenge to sort of bring that in and
Yes,
convince
it will.
people?
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. There is no doubt about it. It requires a lot of action. It also requires collective consultancy, I think, amongst professional groups, because globally, everywhere in the world now, people have stopped promoting towers, apartment towers. So there's almost like a global consensus now that we want buildings which are maybe 4 floors to maximum 6 floors height. We don't want it higher than that. Ideally, around 3 to 4 floors is perfect, but we will make it dense. So, well, that's something. If you are doing the urban design studio now, that's something which one really needs to investigate. How can you do that? Can you still satisfy the requirements of number of houses or habitations per acre, but with a different morphology?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it is difficult,
So,
no doubt. Yeah,
so I'm Faria.
yeah.
So I have a question. Earlier you spoke about reducing the need for commute, reducing the need for commute. Yeah. So now in specific about Vasan Nagar, when the area itself is dense, it's a mixed use neighborhood. So where along with residents, there are a lot of student or working community. So for them, these commuting areas are what I mean, what they usually use. So how do we make those kind of spaces more engaging or friendly?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. Yeah. Well,
So can
okay.
you hear me
So
now?
what you need to see is that what are the engines of can you, yeah, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Do you want her to repeat the question, Dinesh? Faria, could you just repeat the last bit, please?
Yes, ma'am. So, so when we are
Yeah.
in these dense mixed-use neighborhoods, uh, where along with residents there are a lot of students or even working class who travel on a daily basis to such neighborhoods. So for them, how do we make these streets or the commuting areas more engaging and friendly?
Well, yeah. So one of the strategies which one typically would use is, like I said, you separate the high speed movement from the low speed. So it can happen that the edges of your development are high density. I mean, not high density, they are high speed transit areas, because you have to connect with the metro, you have to connect with the bus system, you have to do that. But once you step off that, it can be a lot more pedestrian friendly. It can actually be zoned. So if you really look at actually the planning of residential zones, it's there. We very often we will deliberately make streets narrower to reduce vehicular speeds. We will deliberately not make through roads. We will make T junctions, stagger roads. Why? Just to prevent people from clipping through them. So there are design based methods on how to manipulate these things. And these are the skills that we pick up as architects and planners. How can I create a certain situation? If I want from a very busy road to come down to a very quiet neighborhood, I can do it by design. It can be done. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you may have to actually do overlays of how local inhabitants use the space and how people coming from outside use the space. They're going to be like layers and layers of movement, and each person will have a different experience. We can't force fit everything into one set of design solutions. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Other questions?
So you just said how in an urban design context you can't force fit a lot of solutions. And now as 8th semester students, I think, well, I'll speak for myself. After designing from a smaller scale to slightly larger scales, it's sort of intimidating to me. How will I start incorporating a lot of solutions at such a larger scale? How do I look at commuters, at transport, at various, say, densities? What solution do I cater to? What particular concept do I cater to? How do I make such a decision? If there's a suggestion you can give.
Yeah, well, normally the usual kind of standard way of doing it is that you experience the site, which you can't do now in COVID. You walk around it, and you develop a kind of an intuitive kind of sense of this is what the place needs. It's not very scientific, but we train our intuition by doing this repeatedly. We go on doing this until our feelers start becoming more sensitive, and then you say that this is what really needs addressing, and this is okay. I can ignore this. That's one thing that you do. So you start isolating things that you want to address. You can't obviously address everything. So the first thing you do is you isolate some things which you believe are important to address. Number one. Number two is that even within that, there are possibilities of standardized solutions, standardized approaches, and there are possibilities where there are unique approaches. So you need to also distinguish between that. If I have a kind of a situation, a design situation, which is going to recur at many places, can I have a typical approach for that? Or do I have one very specific situation? For instance, there's this beautiful old building on one side, there's a tree on the other side. It is a very specific situation. Then I design for that. So your solution also actually becomes a collage of all these things. It's not a grand vision that architects are supposed to have. But it's a beautiful vision nevertheless. Yeah. Grand visions also have a place in architecture, but one has to be very careful with that. We tend to let our egos run away with us.
Thank you, sir.
This is Ankita. I have a question. So in general, when I come across the term urban planning, it's usually what I've come across is like city planning in terms of plan or something. But what I feel is the people who use the space, they travel through it, and what they see is mostly like verticality, as in like the urban fabric they move through. So how do we as when we go about designing a urban planning or something, how do we go about it in terms of verticality, if you get what I'm trying to?
Okay, very, very good question again. So this is a problem because we always start off with plans. Now, a plan is a very abstract view which you're seeing from way up in the sky and you're looking down, right? So we start with the plan. So already in our minds, we are playing God. We are up there and we're looking down on things. So that in a way, you've lost a connect already when you do that. So you need to have a separate effort which counters that. Because you can't do without the plan. That's the only way you can handle the entire thing. We cannot avoid it. But can we have another strategy which goes underneath it and which digs into it? So you need a different strategy for that. So I'm sure there are many approaches in which you can do that. I mean, we talk about POV, we talk about Gonzo architecture. There are many ways of looking at it where you say that, can I look at this from a purely experiential point of view? Number one. Can I imagine myself inhabiting this architecture, walking through it, driving through it, running through it, playing hopscotch in it? Can I also do that simultaneously? Because I cannot avoid that. That top-down view, I cannot avoid. It's unrealistic. So develop your own strategies of say, how do I go through this? And remember that 3D modeling is a very, very poor tool. It's very deceptive. It's not easy. It distorts like mad. You're always seeing everything in wide angle, which is not real life. But it's a good question and something that we have to keep engaging with, because the experience on the ground can be very different from what a planner thinks.
And that's what Jacobs and Deserto and all of those folks were kind of arguing about. Deserto talks about literally a god looking at New York City from the top of the one of those towers, and God, like planner, right? Jacobs is also speaking about some of those. And the reason I bring up these people is these students have studied urban design theory last semester. That is, they're familiar with some of those, and we keep pushing them to remember what they studied there, you know. And maybe
the only thing they seem to remember is eyes on the street, because they all mention that. So,
and we should not forget the ballet of the sidewalk if you are remembering eyes on the street, because Jacobs writes about that as well. Yeah. Other questions, guys?
Just talking about these like COVID times and to design in these times. So we know that like, you know, like you talked about, we try to study the site and see the activity of the people that's happening. But we know for a fact that now the activity is not the same. And a lot of these are actually empty. So how would you like get your context cues for starting urban design from, you know, at a time like this?
I would imagine it. I would imagine it. It's like this, that when you don't have a reality, you create one. And a lot of great design actually has resulted from people just imagining things. So what you can do, that I'll tell you, I had one of my seniors, a very infamous senior of mine, who did a project called Joe's Garage, where he picked up a site which was imaginary. So first he had to design the site. Then he said there was a fire on that site. That site had buildings and everything. Then he said there was a fire. So then he again redesigned the whole thing to show how it looked like after the fire. Then he said it was occupied by a guy who ran an automobile garage. So then he designed it for the third time and said that this is how it looks like as an automobile garage. And then that became the site for his project. So he designed the site 3 times over. Completely imaginary. Can you imagine that? So if you don't have data, cook it up.
Not so soon in the semester, Dinesh.
Cook it up.
Yeah, that's like desperate times measure.
No, but the point is, Navila, point is, having cooked up the data, that's your starting point.
Yeah.
How do you then design to that cooked up data?
Has to be logical, right?
That is the challenge, because you can't change the data. Once you've cooked it up, you can't change it.
Yeah. You're a victim of your data then. I think Devyani has a question. Yeah.
So you gave a very personal and beautiful account of your childhood in Bangalore. When I think of my childhood, I can only think of going to school in my school bus, coming back, and then going to tuition. And my leisure time was just playing in the PC. So like as a regular citizen, how do I start connecting city and my surroundings? And the other part of the question is, as an architect, what can we do to enhance these connections that people feel with their city?
Okay, good question, and again a very big one. Yes, having grown up with the world of screens, it's very difficult to imagine one without screens. I know what it feels like because I've lived both worlds, so I know it's hard. And when you're constantly used to something in front of you, which occupies you, it's actually a real social barrier, because even when you're looking at your phone, you're cutting off that person who's in front of you. In our days, it was considered to even rude to even take a phone call when somebody was talking to you. You can't do that. But this is a new normal. So what we need to do is that, like I said, I can't be nostalgic about my past because it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I can't expect to recreate that. So can I find value that I can carry in here is really the question. And even for you, if you've not known it, how will you experience it? So there are many ways in which we can do it, some of which, of course, COVID has put a real spanner into it. But we always say, number one, travel. Travel. Travel is very, very important because it takes you out of your preset routine. It takes you out of your zone of familiarity. And you have to engage with a different culture, with a different language, different currency, different food. And you may like it, you may hate it. You may be very comfortable, you might be miserable, but you're engaging with it. Because as long as you're going home, school, tuitions, back, video games, cell phone, Netflix, you're staying within a comfort zone. So you have to get out of that comfort zone. So right now, travel is difficult, but if there's any way in which you can step out of your comfort zone, that's the first step to learning something. Number one. Number two, try to reduce your screen time. This is true for all of us. We all need to do this. Can you cut down your screen time? Switch off that phone. Shut that laptop. Try it. It's worth it, because then initially you'll get bored as hell. You won't know what to do. But out of that idleness, out of that boredom, is where true creativity starts. When you don't know what to do with yourself, then you cook up things to do. And that's just wonderful. When you're looking at your cell phone, you're looking at social media, you always, first of all, you're indexing yourself with other people, number one. So your expectations, your aspirations start getting aligned with those are the people that you experience through this media. If you take that away, then you are forced to think afresh. You're forced to think for yourself. You're forced to have your own opinion. Yeah, this is not just about architecture, this is about life. Because the moment you're forced to have your own opinion, you can't depend on anyone, you can't depend on any trend, any influencer. Sorry, all out of the window. And you're forced to think that, what do I really like? What do I really want to do? What do I really believe? What do I find beautiful? What do I enjoy? Then you might end up dancing. I don't know. You could be doing anything, isn't it? So screen time is one thing. Out of your comfort zone is another thing. These are all lead you to self-discovery and learning. It's very, very clear. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, I feel very sad that you have to go through this school tuition routine. Yeah, I put my son in a school which is 40 kilometers outside Bangalore. It was in a village, so he learned to swim in a well. And yeah, and they had to all sweep their own rooms. They had to cut vegetables in the kitchen. They had to clean septic tanks. They had to grow veggies. So my son can do all of that. Yeah. When he came back for his 12th standard, for his first degree, he didn't know how to use an ATM. So to give you an example of how extreme it is. So we can get stuck in these worlds, and it's very important as a designer to not be stuck in one world. So you need to get out of your comfort zone. There is no doubt about it. Yeah.
Sir, I had a question. So our studio is currently looking at public commercial complexes in urban areas and how it evolved or how it came to a certain typology in those particular urban areas. So I wanted to know your perspective on how these BDA complexes came up as a typology for these commercial complexes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not directly familiar with the history of the BDA complexes, but what we can see is that, of course, when you're making a housing colony effectively, which is what the BDA was doing, making plotted developments of a few thousand plots, for instance, then obviously you wonder, where will these people get their vegetables? Where will they go for a haircut? Where will they, So there is a need for some kind of a commercial activity. So the problem starts with the fact that you're making a layout, whether it's Arkavati layout or BTM layout or JP Nagar or whatever, that you're making this very uniform, monofunctional monoculture. You're only residential. You're making thousands of residential plots. And then you think, my God, what have I done? They need shops. So, but it's kind of too late in the day, actually. So what you do is you take one plot and you say, okay, shops will be here. It's like those old pirate maps, dragons be here, gold be here. So it's like that, shopping be here. So you just pick a plot and you say, okay, this is a shopping, and I've solved the problem. I've got 1,000 bungalows and I've got one little shopping thing out there. So you see, there is a basic disconnect. If you look at older fabrics, you look at Chamrajpet, you look even older than that, you look at Chickpet, you look at Alsur, you look at Jogpalya, you look at, any of these places, Lingarajpuram, there is such a gnarly mess of residential, commercial, industrial. It's all mixed up together. And you, in your great wisdom, have decided that, no, I'm going to paint this whole thing residential. Zurich, yellow zone, across the whole thing. And then you have created a problem. And then you do a half-assed attempt at fixing that problem. That is the BDA complex. The BDA complex is a half-assed attempt at fixing a problem created by a monoculture of residential plots. That's my take on it.
Just to add to what Dinesh said, I think it's something you might be studying later in the semester as well in your urban planning course. The idea of the neighborhood unit, and where, as Dinesh said, all the commercial activity would be lumped in. So every neighborhood was conceived as one self-sufficient unit to the most part of it. So you'd have residential and you'd have, so they would have these, percentages, so residential might be 30 to 40, and then you'd have commercial would be some 3%. So all these kinds of allocations, which is a very Eurocentric way of doing it. And
no, this all starts with Geddes, actually. The problem is that they have to study Geddes. You not understand from Garden City, Howard to Geddes. There's a whole progression of thinking which led to this set of bylaws and zoning that we have today.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of scholarly actually study to get it.
So they have a bit of that. They'll get a sneak peek of it later this semester in their urban planning class. So maybe you want to study those.
So what I gave is just a very functionalist kind of a reduction of that.
Yeah.
So
and how it's actually panned out. It didn't work. It hasn't worked.
Didn't work, yes.
Yeah. The context is very different, so it hasn't really worked out. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Others? So Dinesh, I had one more question. So you talked about Gesellschaft and Gemeinschaft and the idea of community and society, right? That's what it is. So a more cohesive form is the community. And I mean, within the city too, we do see these small communities forming, right? It's like, it's not like, and I think I'm interested in the idea of the commons versus public spaces, where public space would be more the plan versus the commons, where people themselves create these spaces through appropriation or their activities.
Right.
And so do you see room for, I mean, and I think that's what with the RWAs and other community groups that we are seeing in the city, it's not like people have been very passive either, right? So there are a lot of groups that you see doing various things. Anything that stood out for you that you'd like to refer to in the public realm?
No, I think, the RWAs are very good at the level of self-organizing on a day-to-day basis, and on a more of a kind of an annualized basis, very looking very short-term. So they're very good for that. I mean, in terms of waste management, handling the park and all of this, they do a very good job of that. And at times like this in COVID also, sometimes they're very responsive. They're much quicker response than the institutions are. So they're all good. I think but the point is that they are still subservient to the structures of the BBMP and all of that, because ultimately that's where our taxes go. That's where our expenditure comes from. So what we have found in our experience is that the quality of your corporator is very important. The quality of your MLA is very important, because these are the people who have agency. They are able to get things done for you. So whenever we've had a good corporator, our neighborhood has looked up very clearly. So there's a clear connect between community and politics, very clear, which translates at a very everyday level to the kind of quality of life that you have. It's quite immediate, surprisingly. I mean, even MLAs and MPs, they have discretionary money. They have the MLA funds. They can spend, I think, 2 crores per year, no questions asked. So if you're on good terms with your MP or your MLA, you can get payments redone, you can get parks spiffied up, you can get all kinds of things done, bus shelters made. You can really improve the quality of things. So there is a possibility. But this is, like I said, RWA is acting within the system. What we don't yet have is the level where people can participate in the administration and the setting up of rules. That we are a long way from that. And in fact, even at the level of a country, I think Panchayati Raj has taken a huge hit. It started off very promisingly, but right now it's a mess. And it's not living up to its promise at all. So local self-government is a big issue, which is much bigger than architecture, but which is completely integral to the way in which we create the built environment. So I would say that, there's something else which I was connected with what you were saying. Slipped my mind. Sorry.
Because I was thinking, as you said, when you think of RWAs, they are a force to reckon with. And as you said, they work with the system, because then the flip side of it is, of course, everything stays spruced up and nice, but there's a problem of NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard business that happens. So that again is not very good for the public realm in that sense. So beyond that,
no, there are, Yeah, I remember what I wanted to tell you. This is very important. You may be aware of it already, but there's a very interesting and potentially a dangerous development where this was, I think, wasn't the Bangalore task force. It was Janagraha, along with one of these, one of those groups. Not B-Track. What's the name of that? BPAC. BPAC.
BPAC. Okay, yeah.
So Janagraha along with BPAC, they had a proposal which was never implemented, which I think is a good thing, where they wanted to take the data from RWAs and find a way of linking that with real estate values.
Okay.
So they had a 16 point scorecard for your neighborhood. And the idea was that it works a little bit like this in the US, where the value of your house depends on how good the neighborhood is.
Yeah.
So you have 16 scores for every neighborhood, and they were trying to link up the real estate value to those scores. So the idea being that if you live in a cleaner, prettier, well-run neighborhood, your house would be more valuable. So this comes with a lot of dangers because it is actually speaking to the commercialization of real estate and of community. And like it happens in the US, that people are very militant about how you use the neighborhood. It has a lot of potential for being misused. But this is an interesting thought, because then how does one, in a way, index the quality of urban life? Because that's what it really is.
Yeah.
So if you imagine you had 16 factors, how different would Chamrajpet be from Vasant Nagar, be from Jayanagar, be to Tyagaraj Nagar, Tilak Nagar? I mean, can you imagine that there could be a vast spectrum of differences on the 16 factors.
Other questions, guys?
Yes.
Hi, Dinesh. This is Deepak here.
Hi. Yeah, Deepak.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Dinesh.
Hey, glad you enjoyed it.
So you were talking about the invisible threat which is running along with the smart city, all this AI and stuff which is going around, which we are already a part of, and all those things, right? So
absolutely, yes.
Just like how a king builds his palace and then builds an underground tunnel to escape his own palace, can architecture be looked at? Can architecture be looked at as a tool? As designers are consciously designing the streets and designing the entire built environment, can architecture be looked at as a tool, as an escape from this? I mean, it cannot be a tunnel through which you can escape, because we cannot escape the city. We are equally responsible to it.
Right.
So architecture needs to be looked at as a way of looking at things wherein the built environment will still survive without the existence of any of these AIs, because something crashes. I mean, tomorrow's wars will never be fought on a battlefield, but on a digital playground, basically.
For sure,
and
yes.
it is highly possible that these things crash and then the entire city comes to a standstill.
So it's a cat and mouse game, Deepak. Actually, what happens is that authorities come up with rules, somebody hacks it, then they have a patch for it, then you've got to find a new hack, and then there's another patch over that.
Yeah.
And then there's a new operating system, so then all your patches are useless anymore. So it's a constant cat and mouse game. I mean, theoretically, if I don't want to release my data, how can I do that? How can I live in a life? How can I live a life which is an urban life?
Disconnect
without
from
surrendering my data.
Disconnect
Is
from
it at
all
all possible?
gadgets.
Is it at all possible? Yes. No, because even now you have cameras on the streets, you have facial recognition. You can be tracked.
Yes. Yeah.
So is it really possible? I mean, have we passed that Rubicon? Is there a point of no return where you say my privacy is dead?
No, I don't think it's possible. But
I mean, you get those little pouches where you can put your devices, where no magnetic
correct.
field gets out of it. I mean, but that pouch is also detectable, and that becomes what do you call it? An object of interest. So anybody who has a pouch immediately is a suspicious character.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're saying, is there a possibility that we can escape? Can we have an underground tunnel? The moment there's a presence of a tunnel, that makes you a suspect.
No. I'm saying what I'm asking is that there is no possibility of escape. So that's why I said you cannot build a tunnel, but we need to consciously figure out a way where how architecture can be used to shape built environments, where even if these systems are hacked, the city life still keeps going on. I mean, is there a possibility like that? And if so, like, what do you think? How?
I think we might be past that, because I think now architecture cannot cope actually in a way. These systems are already so sophisticated. They're amazingly sophisticated. Did you read that article? I think I had shared it about the military simulations of cities. Huh? I thought that was fascinating. They're looking at the urban, at the conurbation from the point of view that if there is a conflict here, if I have to convert this into a kill box, how can I do it? They're looking at the city like that. And this comes back to what that girl was talking about the codes and the bylaws, because all of these things are coming from a place where they see hostile operatives and agents, and they need to take care of them. So each one of us is potentially, a hostile agent. So the systems are designed for that. The only way we can counter it is by a revolution from the ground up, is what I think. Which is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So
Definitely not happening in this semester. So we still have to. So the thing is,
but hacking is still something which we need to look at, because that's something where you're taking back power from the machine. That's what a hacker does.
Correct. Yeah. So as you were talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you were talking about that, about the AI and all these things, you were also talking about, we need to be careful about who is in control of this.
Yes, indeed.
Of this game.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So, but the thing, I'm still not 100% sure about what I'm going to say right now. But I think maybe just like how free will is an illusion to all of us, maybe this is also an illusion. I'm not sure. So, so what I'm thinking is, the internet is still a democratic place. Maybe tomorrow it might not be, but still a democratic place.
It's almost gone already.
Okay.
The sheer. I'll tell you why. Because what we very conveniently forget is that internet does not happen without these massive underground cables, without these millions of server farms, without those million kilowatts of energy which is feeding the server farms, and those are actually controlled by people.
Yes, but there is also a matter of speed.
Sorry?
There is also the issue of speed, right?
Yeah.
No, there's another tech which is coming in place, which is still not completely come into place, but which is still in the process of coming in, which is the Li-Fi. Which is
they've been talking about it for at least 10-15 years now, so I don't know. Because when at the time when I was designing a lot of software offices, we were talking about Li-Fi, because we were trying to replace the entire the data distribution system with Li-Fi. They said it was still too experimental. This is a long time back actually, and that was when LED lights were just being introduced.
Yeah. No, what I'm
But
saying is
the
that there
thing
is
is,
still the
again,
issue of speed. No?
I'm not so worried about speed, because speed is a technological milestone which can always be achieved. I think control is really the bigger problem. Centralized control and private control. These are the two things. If there's some way we can have a truly democratic data distribution system, I don't know, maybe a purely peer-to-peer based system. Is that possible? We'll go back to barter, no? That's peer-to-peer.
No, because I was also looking at how they are claiming that the Bitcoin is kind of like, a democratic system. Though I couldn't fully understand it, but they seem to justify.
No, I'll tell you what. Yeah. Basically, what Bitcoin is, that it's not. I forget the exact term, but it's not a currency which is controlled by a government.
Yeah.
That's the main reason why it's free. But it's what I'm reading off late is that it's not really viable at large scale, because it takes so much energy to produce Bitcoin. To mine Bitcoin requires a ridiculous amount of electricity.
Yeah.
And it may not be feasible as a way of global transactions. It will just remain as another option as a currency, as an exchange.
No, but the idea is still a start, right? Actually.
Idea is a good idea. It's a good. The idea is basically to say that I don't want the government telling me what the value of my things are.
Yeah. No, so that's why I'm just thinking, it's still it is still a possibility for it to be highly democratic, right?
No, that's again because it's still at a small scale. It's still at a small scale, and it's not really democratic also, because it's subject to all kinds of forces. If Elon Musk says something about Bitcoin, the value goes up. That's not a stable currency. Yeah, it's not. But yeah, I mean, as an idea, it's a great idea. So we need more similar ideas. I think we're literally, again, like Bitcoin is what it's doing, that it's hacking the global currency system, and that's what we need to do. Even architecturally, can we hack bylaws? Can we hack client programs?
So, like the famed sociologist Manuel Castells said, he talks about spaces of flows and spaces of places. And he says flows are where all these things you were talking about, right? We live in a world that's filled with all this technological stuff which connects people at a global scale. But then finally, people experience places at a very local, like one of our students, Ankita, talked about, you have tall buildings, but you're walking at the street level. So how do you connect, and that's what we are, again, bringing it back to this, the micro issues of the studio, that's what we are engaging with this time. So I think, so we are still, despite these bigger things, we are still able to build, or we at least as architects aspire to build spaces of community life and collective life. And I think, that's something, hopefully these kids are able to make a bigger connections. Yeah.
When we come down to it, Salila, we need to sleep, we need to eat,
exactly.
We need to take a dump. So we need architecture. We need architecture. There's no doubt. We cannot live a virtual life.
Absolutely. Yeah. True. That is true. So life.
So that's our starting point, really. I mean, in the sense that we are doing something which is inescapable, I would say.
Absolutely, it's a privilege.
Tomorrow the internet may crash, but architecture will still stand.
Absolutely. So that's a very privileged position to be in as well, because we do shelter is something that will never go out of fashion. That's something we need forever.
Right.
And so is social life, something that will never go out of fashion, hopefully. So other questions, guys? Any other comments? I think that's that then. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So very, very interesting and engaging talk, architect Dinesh.
Thank you.
not having a privilege to grow in Bangalore city, but I could see the glimpses of how the city has changed over the decades through your eyes and camera.
Right.
Okay, couple of things come to my mind, but of course I would not keep it for this discussion now. But now what we see that whenever there is a small change happening in the city, for example, that construction of a proposed steel bridge and then making some
Right.
facility for the city, for the MLAs, for the politician in Cubbon Park, there are a lot of reaction from the public. So I was wondering that when these kind of changes were taking place at, during that time, you talked about the tank which is now no more there near this tin factory or the
Right.
your
Right.
Vasant Nagar. So was there a public reaction to this kind of actions by the government?
No, not at all.
That is,
Not at
yeah.
all.
So
Not
do
at
you
all.
attribute this to the technology that we have, that suddenly that the people gather at the Freedom Park the moment you get
Yes.
some message on the
Yes.
WhatsApp? Okay, so that was
Yes.
one
No,
thing.
no, there
And,
are very interesting
okay.
questions. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that is one thing. The second thing is
Ah.
that as a citizen of the Bangalore, when you started really feeling the impact of the migration, because you were talking about, say you have the large number of cinema theaters across this Kempegoda, this one area where you have parallelly you have the Telugu movies, Kannada movies, Malayalam movies,
Right.
and this one. So it really talks about the multilinguistic character of the this one, and it has not happened without the migration of large scale migration of people from the neighboring. Now this one, now we see the large number of migrants coming from the north of the India also. So when as a citizen people is still realizing that this is something which is not happening for the good of the city, or happening for the good of the city or not for the good of the city, there is one thing.
So well,
so that question comes to my mind. And then another thing is that as a role of if you look at the role of the architects for the future of the cities, okay, these people are handling the urban design studios. So now we talk about, now everything revolves around the energy. So I think the sustainability is going to be the key. This is what I think. I think because everything is going to be revolve around, because you are talking about, let's say, this girl has raised the question about this high intensity traffic. You give the example, if you look at the sector planning of the Chandigarh by Corbusier, actually. So he said that all high speed traffic will be around the sector, and then the cycling and the footpath will be inside this one, isn't it? And then the proximity to the places which the people or the citizen need, let it be the school or the grocery shops and all those things. So these are the things which are going to determine it has the huge impact on the energy the neighborhood will require to sustain itself. So I think the whole now thing is, it's not that whether the cities have to be futuristic, but the future lies in conserving the energy. So to make it to make it ultra mod, or go to the basic principles which were prevailing during the time of our forefathers.
Very true. That's a very clear dichotomy we have. Yeah.
So these are some of the questions. Maybe that we'll keep it for the discussion when we meet next over the cup of tea.
Sure.
But the post-talk discussion and the question raised by the students were also very interesting. Yeah. So it was quite engaging, and very, very engaging. Thank you very much for being on this platform and sharing your view with the students.
My pleasure.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dinesh. Yeah, Shalini.
Thanks, Salila. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, Shalini.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for the captivating and highly energetic session today.
You're very, very kind. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'd like to also thank the principal and the other faculty members who joined us today. And we look forward to see you in the next session, which is scheduled on the 4th of May with architect Chetan Shivaprasad. So, yeah, thank you.
Dinesh, I hope you join us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Salila and team. It's wonderful talk.
Sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sir. Thanks for attending. Bye, Dinesh. See you soon.
Bye. See you.
Bye guys.
Bye, Dinesh.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.